Hey.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, my name's Chino, Odimba. I'm a playwright and poet and theatre director.
I'm Matilda, Ibini, and I'm a playwright and screenwriter.
I'm Charlotte, Josephine. I'm an actor and a writer.
I'm Keith, Jarrett. I'm a writer of poetry and fiction.
I'm Leo, and I'm a writer and director, and I run Milk Presents Theatre Company.
I'm Nessah, Muthy. I'm the writer for TV and theatre.
My name is Frazer Flintham, and I'm a playwright and a screenwriter.
I'm Natasha Sutton-Williams, and I am a playwright, a composer, and an actor.
Where do you get your inspiration to write from?
A mixture of my past, so things that have happened in my past that I've sometimes doesn't feel like it comes from there. But then when I start to write something, I go, oh yeah, that's that thing that happened, or takes me a while to work that out. Sometimes it can be a chat, a conversation with someone, often something I don't understand, or like a part of myself I don't understand, or I don't quite know what it is. And then sometimes it can be literature, or kind of, when I say that, I suppose in terms of the news or an outside source.
I sometimes look at the local newspaper just for like really different stories that aren't in the mainstream news. So some or even just for characters, or there's something slightly different about local news than there is mainstream news. But yeah, for me, it's a mixture of everything. It's the past, the present, the future. I often write what I don't see out in the world, or in the kind of on stage or on screen, and often that involves putting characters, women, working class women, women of colour, centre stage or centre screen. But also do a lot of writing for children, so I try and write what I think my kids would like, but they're really harsh critics, so so that's not always easy.
I think that I try to write things that I would find funny, that I think other people would find funny, and kind of going on like a kind of like, what's the kind of most extreme, what's the kind of most extraordinary thing that could happen, and kind of go with that. And I think specifically with theatre, this idea of, if we're using this specific medium, which is a medium whereby you can use the imagination, you can use the writer's imagination, the director's animation, the audience's imagination, the actor's imagination, and how can you change that literal space of the theater into, the moon, the sewers, a doctor's office, all this kind of stuff, and how can we kind of present this very specific type of kind of media, or this kind of literary genre? What's the most interesting thing we can do with that space?
So the next question is, how do you know which of your ideas to pursue? And I'm going to throw this out to Leo.
I think for me, it's just the one that just won't go away. Probably I'll have quite a few on the go, and some of them I'll just forget, or some of them will stay with me. And then also, really practically speaking, it's a deadline. So I may really want to work on this thing over here, but I have to get this other thing in for Friday. And then sometimes if I'm working on one thing, the other thing will be writing itself in my head. And so it's easier to come back to it. I guess it's a deadline, like practically speaking, what job needs to be done when, and also which one you just can't get rid of.
Yeah, I'll add to that. For me, it's like which one feels the hottest right now is like the feeling in my body where I'm like, oh, there's an urgency to that one. And similar to you, I've usually got a few things on the go because I'm juggling a few jobs to like make ends meet financially, but also because life's not linear, and unfortunately I don't get the pleasure of like just doing one job on its own from start to finish. but I think I'm learning how to juggle and like let things feed into each other, or let things like be very different and bounce off each other. So whatever one feels the hottest is the kind of way of describing it for me, where I'm like, oh, I need to write that thing, and it kind of keeps me up all night, or like I'm like excited about it. And it's usually not the thing that I'm supposed to be doing. Like if I've got a commission, I'm supposed to be working on this play, but actually secretly I'm having a little affair with this one, and that one's really hot right now. And I don't know why I do that to myself, and then I have to fall back in love with the one that I'm supposed to be doing. It's childish, really.
Can I just add to that, the idea of having an affair with what you should, with something that you're not meant to be writing at that time. I find sometimes, and this has happened for me just on a few occasions where it's worked, you're working on the thing that you're actually passionate about that isn't really urgent, but then sometimes you can just kind of shoehorn that in to your main project in the end. And so yeah, I find it's what I shouldn't be working on, but which is still preoccupying me, or what I'm most scared about writing, what I don't want to show to anyone else because it's too personal, it's too deep. That's what I end up writing, and is what works more because my heart's in it.
I have a little secret where I keep a jar that looks like a cookie jar of just ideas. So I'll write them down, and I know that they're in the jar, especially when I am tempted to start something new or I haven't finished what I'm working on. So I just like have a peruse of the ideas jar. And if you keep a jar of all your ideas over a couple of years, you kind of like, one, discover how weird you are, but also like you see kind of how your ideas have like changed about things, or like how you've now feel differently about certain things. And they could be anything from like, oh, this is a really interesting place, oh, I like this name of a character, one day I want to research this to find out more about something. But I know that all the ideas are safe in the jar, so that I don't have to keep them all in my head constantly.
And Matilda actually gave me one of these jars for my birthday, and now that jar hosts a lot of rice. There's no ideas in there. We're going to move on to the next question, which is, what is the most helpful lesson you have learned about writing? So I'll throw it over to you, Leo.
That there isn't actually a right way to do it at all. And you can read all the books that you want to read, or you can try and read them and not finish them. And you can learn your ABCs of playwriting, but ultimately, if you write, you're a playwright. You know, if you write and you've made a play, that's playwriting. You know, there isn't really, there's definitely things that you can do that will help your writing and that can help you structure your writing. So I've just seen the cat on it, and Nessah's, hey.
I'm so sorry, I don't know what she's doing. She never does this. I'm just going to move the camera.
Just getting really involved with the chat.
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
She's got some really like great advice on structures, which she'd like to give us. But no, there's loads of things that you can read and learn, and it's all out there to find. And sometimes we think that it's like this elite science that we can't touch, but actually, I would say, really practically, you can definitely do it. It's all there, and that there isn't really a way to write. There's just suggestions of how you can make your writing that you can already do a little bit more improved, and that it's something you can learn, like learning an instrument or learning, you know, to ride a bike. It's very achievable, I would say.
What about you, Chino? You seem to be nodding your head vigorously there.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I sort of spent so long feeling like a self-taught writer, so I don't know any of the rules. I really don't. And I spent so long resisting the rules that I now have to kind of admit to liking some of the rules, which is quite difficult. But I think in answer to the question, like the thing that I learned, the first ever playwriting workshop I ever went to was with a brilliant writer called Winsome Pinnock. And Winsome said, you know, that thing in your script, that thing that you think is really clever, that line that you think is so funny, and that's the like funniest line in your play, you're so clever, and you know, that's the first thing you're going to have to get rid of when you go back to rewrite. And I was just like, whoa, but I've absolutely like stuck with that actually, because, and so what it does is it gives you freedom to write the things that you think are really clever, but you don't hold any attachment to it. It gives you freedom to be playful, but you don't hold any attachment to it. And so actually it wasn't like, don't write what you want to write, or don't write that thing that you think is really funny, or that line that is your like in joke with yourself. Like, it's not don't write it, it's just when you go back to the real writing, which is the redrafting, don't be precious about it. Like, you know, enjoy it for what it is and then let it go. And that's kind of been the biggest thing I remember in all my writing. And it really helps. It still helps every day.
It's fortunate that was your first playwriting class as well.
I know, it's really lucky. It's really lucky.
Does anyone else have any thoughts on this?
I was just going to say that writing's a muscle. I think that's the thing, and that the more you do it, not the easier that it becomes, but it becomes like habit. And I think when things become habitual, as long as it's not like, you know, a terrible habit, like it just helps my brain click in a lot more. It's like, oh no, I can find that muscle quite quickly now, and whether that doesn't necessarily mean it's of quality, but I can access it quite quickly. So I just try and write every single day, something, even if it's just like the automatic writing exercise or something like that.
I can't remember who said it. It was in a class or something. I don't know who it was, but said that even like, as the more experienced you get, like I sometimes feel the pressure to be like, oh God, I should be better at this. It should be easier. And I get the bit about the muscle growing, but the kind of like, oh God, am I going to get the tap on the shoulders? Like, you don't know what you're doing. You've been caught out. But the idea that every time you sit down and write a new play, even if you've got that backlog of experience, it's like, how am I going to write this play? And it's always a new like journey, and then like meeting this stranger every time that you're going to like have to get to know. And I really like, hold on to that, and I go, it's all right. You're at that part again where you're just jumping off that cliff and you don't know who that is. And actually, I'm learning to sit in that uncomfortable space more, I think, even though I'm potentially should be getting better. You like, actually it sometimes feels the opposite, and just to be comfortable with that, I found has been useful to me, and that I hold on to.
I'll just add to that and say it feels a bit like any relationship. There are some days where it's really beautiful and it's romantic. I'm in love with writing and I just want to do everything and it's just new and exciting. But then there's the hard work, there's the arguments, back and forth. I'm not saying actually my relationships with people are a lot more harmonious than with my own writing. But with writing, it is sometimes, I'd say the editing process is the most hard work, and it is about letting go of your babies, all of your favorite lines. When it comes to writing poetry, something useful that I was taught was very often you can get rid of the final line or the final stanza because you've been trying to wrap it up in a bow, and actually you can leave some things. If you haven't said it by about halfway through, then you probably need to go back to the beginning and really think about where the heat is. And that applies to any genre. So like the ending is really important. But yeah, just knowing that every day your relationship with the writing is going to be different. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it just feels really, really painful.
You know what, I'm actually going to use what you just said. I've been struggling with this thing early this morning, and the fact that like if you've left it till the end and you haven't said it yet, then you need to go back and put it in the beginning. So I'll take that, thank you.
My question is, why are writers important? Charlie.
Yeah, I knew that was coming, you know. I knew. I could feel
You know what?
it.
It's because you gave the most resistance in your face. You're like...
It's because it's such a big question. That's why I'm resistant, because it's like I really care. I think creativity is vital for our mental health, and whether you're just colouring in at home, or whether you're playing football in a park, or whether you're in a dance class, or whether you're singing in a choir, or, you know, whether you're getting paid for it or not, like, creativity is absolutely vital for your mental health. And when that is taken away from you, it's a huge, like, violation, I think, of your rights, and is very damaging. And I feel like, depending on which politician we currently are putting up with as Prime Minister, like, it depends on what's happening in schools and where the funding is. And so there are different groups of people that feel like they're not allowed to be. Like, I definitely grew up, for various reasons, feeling like theatre wasn't for me. And that's partly why stubbornly I've pursued it, I think. But writers are important, because I feel like if I'm doing my job right as a writer in a live medium, I'm asking difficult questions more than I'm making statements. And I'm giving voice to a subject that is important, and hopefully that inspires a group of people who feel like they can't talk about something, to allow them permission to talk about something, I think. So writers are important for the same reason that, like, art is important, I think. Not sure if that makes sense. It's a hard one, isn't it? But I know that it is vital, basically.
So I think, like, at the, you know, when people started literally writing and making books, it was this idea that ideas were allowed to proliferate, ideas were allowed to spread, different perspectives were allowed to spread. So I think this is like, ultimately, my thought is that's the reason why writers are important, because they give a different perspective, right? So something that you haven't experienced before, an idea you've never heard about before. And because we have this plethora of, like, subjects and writers, you know, you can read science, you can read, like, the history of religion, you can read plays, all this kind of stuff. It will open your mind, whether you agree with all of it necessarily or not. But it's important to, like, read very widely. It's important to engage in a wide number of, like, media as well. And I think that it's different perspectives, whether you agree with them or not. It's going to open your mind in some way and cement possibly some of your ideas, and also this idea of kind of, like, fixed mindset and growth mindset. Fixed mindset being you're closed down in terms of your thinking and your reasoning, and growth mindset in terms of you have a bit more elasticity. And I think that's why writers are important, because I could go, oh, I'm not really interested in reading this writer, and then I suddenly go, whoa, this person is amazing. So that's my kind of thought, is to do with different perspectives and different voices, obviously.
I was just going to say, I think it's really interesting that how we separate these terms in theatre. For me, like, I don't think I would be doing what I do if I didn't call myself a storyteller. Like, I call myself a writer because I need to identify with something in this tradition of theatre. But, like, ultimately, I think I'm a storyteller, and the reason why I really believe in that word is because my own heritage is storytelling is such a huge part of that. Before newspapers, before news, the way people knew what was happening in the world was through stories and through storytellers. And so, like, the idea of griots in West African culture is, like, so it's just ancient. This is ancient stuff. So I think that's sometimes where we, as a theatre culture, and have to be really careful, because the words and the language we use. If someone had told me that I could have been a storyteller, then I would have started my journey into writing and creativity so much earlier. But I couldn't fix on the idea of being a writer, because that came with all sorts of connotations that, for me, socioeconomically, I couldn't afford to fix to. But I've always been a storyteller. I've always had stories, and I feel like we as human beings are human stories. So, like, it's impossible to see it as something outside of ourselves. Like, none of us can even go to the shop and buy milk without having a story to tell when we come back. I mean, that's just what we do, right? So I think, yeah, so that's all I've got to kind of say in that sense. Like, for me, I very much sit in the storytelling tradition and not and I use the word writer because it fits into a particular framework.
Yeah. I forgot I'm meant to be responding, aren't I? I was just enjoying what you're saying. Yeah, no, just to add on that, like the idea of like writer being sort of academia as well was a thing that I really, like, growing up, had a big sort of thing in my head that being a writer meant I had to be really good at the English language and had to be really, as opposed to actually, the storytelling element being sitting separate from that. To just, just an interesting point.
So the question is, when you get a light bulb moment, is it smart to write down that idea straight away, or is it better to hold on to the idea and set yourself time to sit down and formally plan out how you're going to write it with a layout and a structure?
I always write them down, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm gonna start that or like explore it or expand on that idea. I think you shouldn't ever feel pressured to write a play or a story on every single thing that comes into your head. You'd be incredibly overwhelmed and would not have any time in the world to do anything else. But I think I think the light bulb moment, that feeling, if that idea continues to keep that light bulb on, then you're probably onto something. That's the idea telling you, the writer, that this is, follow me, like write me first out of all the other ideas. So then, depending on your like process, actually, some writers do sit down and they will plan before they even write the first scene or whatever. They might write character biographies. A really good tip I was given was to imagine if this character that you've thought of, what would their CV look like? So the CV forces you to come up with their name, their age, what town did they grow up in, what primary school did they go to, what were their favorite subjects, what kind of work experience did they do. So it kind of forces you to build up the idea of who this character is if you try and write them a CV. But then you've got to do that for all your characters, so it can take you some time. Whilst other writers like myself, I just head straight in. I just start writing. Like, I don't know where I'm going. I don't even know what the story is. I've got barely like a really seed of an idea, and I just start writing, and I'll try and figure it out as I go along. And it does mean you do a lot of writing, and I call it a vomit draft, which is you just keep writing until you can't stop, basically, until you get to like a proper brick wall where you're like, I don't know what to do now. And then you leave it in a drawer for a couple days, couple weeks, and then you come back to it and you read it and you sift through it. You're kind of like a bit like an archaeological dig. You're sifting through all the sand and the mess to see if there's anything like an idea or a character or just a line that will help you build up the story. And I'm very much I feel like my process is very much unorganized, and my process changes depending on what I'm writing and my relationship to it. Like, if it's really personal, I find that it takes me a lot longer to write, as opposed to if I'm writing about something that's a little bit more outside of my own experience. But I definitely know that some writers' process is very much structured, and they have plans, and they really like they want to figure out all the points of the story first before they even begin writing. So I think it's just important to discover and explore, what is your process? What could your process look like?
I'll add to that just by saying, definitely it's important to know yourself and how you work best. However, the longer the piece of writing, then you will need a spine for it. It needs a backbone, and it can't just be a blurb forever. So when I started writing my novel, I just did that vomit. And I had, two main characters that I was juggling with, and it was going over a period of 50 years, which is very complicated. But I started writing scene by scene. What really helps is just putting your character in a scene and just thinking, how is she going to react to this? And then maybe throwing a curveball in there. And maybe that scene won't be in the final piece of writing, but you get to know your characters. And I think the more you get to know them, then you can play around and have an idea. But then afterwards, if it's a long piece of writing, it's good just to have a bit of just some notes, just to say, okay, this is what's going to happen, and I kind of want to end up here. And as you start writing, you'll realize that you'll have to bend that a little, you'll have to change it, and you might find that your plan was completely wrong. So I think a bit of flexibility. But in terms of just writing an idea straight away, something that I've learned, because I used to get quite anxious about that. I'd be on the bus or the tube and have something come into my head and like, oh, I need to write it down, and I've got no battery in my phone. But actually, if it's really in your head, your brain, your memory, your body has a way of letting ideas germinate. I find that when I wake up in the morning, there's probably something that's been on my mind, and in the morning, I am a lot more focused, and I have ideas that I didn't realize that I had. And I don't even need to write them down then. If they're strong enough, they'll re-emerge, 2 weeks, 2 years later, when they're ready. So don't be necessarily like obsessed with getting one idea that you think is brilliant down. Even if you forget it, it doesn't matter. You still have the capability to come up with more ideas.
So next question, what tips does anyone have for editing their writing?
Something like that I've learned is when applying for funding applications, bizarrely, you have to write a paragraph or so of what the play is going to be before it exists, right? And I used to hate this. I used to be like, this is so stupid. Why are they, like, it doesn't exist yet. How can I describe it? But now I find it quite useful. So I do a vomit first draft as well. And I'm like buzzing about it. And I'm like, oh yeah, because it's got so many possibilities and it's not pinned down yet. And I don't really know what it is, but it feels really fun. And then I start doing a bit more research into it and start trying to like find a shape for it and a form for it. And then often around that time, I start trying to apply for funding, or the company that asked me to write it want to know what I've been doing, or like I have to start talking about it. And it can be quite helpful, I think, to have like a clear idea of what the play is. So like writing a 40-word blurb or 100-word blurb that describes the show, like this is the show in which, or character name once, but this is happening. And I'll just allow myself permission to write a really rubbish first draft of like a blurb that describes the show. And I'll imagine myself in the audience watching it, or imagine myself on stage doing it. And that then helps me with the editing, because it's like, is what I've got serving this one idea? And that helps me then remember where we're going and why are we even doing this anyway? Do you know what I mean? Like to try and remind myself. So it becomes like the sort of North Star, or like Keith said, a spine that you can like always return to. So like being really specific in what my intention is with each piece of work, I find helpful. And it can morph and grow and change, because often I don't know what it is at the beginning. That helps me edit. And then having like one other person that is reading it that you trust their opinion, and that like has taken me years to work out like who my tribe is really, and like when it's useful for me to share work and when it isn't. But yeah, like having a clear intention I think is helpful.
Anyone else? Yeah.
There's this phrase, or paraphrasing, come in late and leave early into a scene. And similar to what Keith was talking about earlier about this idea of poems, and if you haven't kind of said it at the start and you're wrapping it up neatly in a bow, this idea if you're coming essentially to the party late and you're leaving early, the audience are catching up with the information and you're keeping them engaged and focused in what's going on, what's going to happen next, as opposed to huge swathes of exposition, tying it up all nicely, all this kind of thing. So I think this idea of can you chop Can you chop your scenes? What happens, just as an experiment, if you chop, you know, the first section of your scene, the last section, and what happens? Does it have a completely different dynamic? And I think that's interesting to do. I think it's probably easier to do with other people's writing than your own, because again, you get that kind of like, oh, but this is so cute, or this line is so funny, blah blah blah. But it's interesting to have a go.
On that note, I sometimes do a little thing where it's really simple, but is in my scene, am I learning something new about the story or the character? Sometimes I do that with every line. Sometimes you're like, sometimes I'm repeating myself, or have I done that bit already? Do I need to do it again? So is it something new about character or story? And can be a bit annoying and really brutal sometimes, but it just helps me just sort of weed out some of the stuff that maybe I don't need, but I like, but I don't need it.
And how long do you think a scene should be? Is there like a set length, or how long are people's scenes?
For me, that's really dependent on what the piece is like, and what form it's taking, what it is I'm trying to say, what the content, how the content can reflect the form of the piece. So like some of my pieces have like quite long scenes. Actually, one piece was just 3 massive long scenes, because that sort of reflected the nature of the people, the characters in it and the world. But then there's another piece that is super choppy, that's probably about 20 scenes, and they are, you know, just you're in for about 3 seconds, or I don't know, maybe 20 seconds, and then you're out. So I think there's no like blanket rule in theatre how long a scene should be. I just think as long as it's you know, similar to what Frazer was saying, you're learning something new as an audience member, and you're and the story, whatever that might be, is pushing forward and changing and developing.
So I think this is our second to last question. How political is the act of writing? And I'm not even sure who I should ask first. It's such a lovely question. I will ask Matilda.
Writing, at least I think, is very inherently very political, because it's like, even writing anything down is like, there's an intent behind it. It's to like draw something that feels out in the ether, like whether that's like what's going on politically, what's going on in your personal life, or in your family, or even just within you as a human. And so trying to get that down on the page is in itself inherently like kind of kind of like a political act, like an act of like, I'm going to try and understand this thing that I'm writing better, or this thing that I'm experiencing better, or I'm going to react or create something that responds to this thing that is happening out in the wider world. I know I think I can say probably, and also like I tend to write quite personal things, so like about things that I experience and what have you, but the personal is political, because we are all in this world at the same time, we're all living at the same time, so that what I'm going through, someone else in my community or in the world, or even on the other side of the world, could also be experiencing that, and that like our existences at the same time kind of like they have an effect on one another. So I know that like what sometimes feels to me that I'm just writing this thing because it's really personal and it upsets me, or I'm angry about it and I want to explore it, also is informed by what the forces, the wider forces in the world. So whether that's my family or the country that I live in or the government that I live under, all of that has a direct effect on how I live. Therefore, it will have a direct effect on how I write. So I think definitely like writing and politics, like they go hand in hand.
Totally agree with with what you just said. I think if there is a group of people who either do not want you to exist or don't believe that you do exist, when you're writing, especially as from a trans perspective, it's like, I exist, I'm here, and this is a concrete thing that you can see or read. And then the characters that you write, they exist and they are here. And so every act or every scene or every character that you make is a political act in itself, because you're making something visible that wasn't there before, I would say.
Sometimes it's the only, like, I feel so powerless over lots of things that are going on in the world, and I have to really focus on the changes that I can make. And sometimes that can be through my art. A lot of my pieces start from a place of like frustration or confusion about something that's happening to me in the world, or like people around me in the world. I think who you choose as your protagonist can be hugely political. Like, it's literally propaganda, like art, especially television and that kind of mainstream work. Like, it's literally propaganda. Like, so representation can sound like a buzzword, but it's absolutely vital. And I think it's like, our writing is so political, and like that doesn't matter who you are, like across the spectrum of humanity. That putting pen to paper and that voicing some thoughts and feelings in the world, and that being received by other people, that of course that's political, and it's fun and exciting and like makes me go yes.
Something that you said then, Charlie, about like propaganda element, and I think where I'm feeling at the moment in like writing is the fact that where are these plays going to exist anyway? So like, where are they going to go on next year? Which has been another thing that, beyond am I going to get commissioned, is a new sort of thing to consider. But then like having written something and having this moment when I thought that might, as we all know, it might never go on, it might never be heard, actors might never speak these words, but actually it feels even more important now to like have that document, or to have told that story, like you said, Chino. It doesn't have to be to have somebody, so that like for all the people's voices being cut out in the world, actually, even if it's just that story you tell to a friend, or that you put in if it's a diary or whatever it is, it feels like it will exist in the world somewhere. And maybe they might not have their life now in this moment, they might have them in 20 years, I don't know. And that feels more important than ever, I think, at the moment for me, in terms of even not engaging with the actual audience, but that as being documentation, and the fact that it's there, and that there. So the point being that it kind of, hopefully at some point, it kind of writes that element of propaganda at some point. That's my hope.
I think just adding to that, what you were saying about propaganda, you just reminded me of, I did this module at university on children's literature, which just ruined children's literature for me, where we kind of had to dissect a really innocent seeming book, Letter to the Zoo. It's really lovely for little kids, but it's this boy who writes a letter to the zoo asking for a pet. And then they send him like a giraffe, and the giraffe's too tall, and the lion is too fierce, and this. But all of that is reinforcing our own cultural values. I think they even send him a monkey. In some places in the world, a monkey is an appropriate pet. In some places in the world, a dog, which is what he ends up with, isn't. But all of that is just a way of reinforcing culture, and that is political. It may be a small p, but it's part of a system that reinforces certain ideas and ideals. Anyway, that was you just made me think of that when you were talking about propaganda.
Okay, so last question is, if you were not a writer, what profession would you be? Keith, there's a big smile there, so I want to know what's behind that one.
It's because whenever I do workshops with kids, and they ask me, like how I ended up writing, I always joke that I could never draw when I was a kid, and I was always jealous of the kids who could draw, and that's what I would like to be a visual artist, but that's probably a lie. I don't know. I mean, it's part of who I am, just using words to express myself. So.
Chino, what about you? Oh, you're muted.
100%. I would be a chef. Like, after stories, food is probably my biggest passion. Yeah, and I think anyone who knows me kind of knows that, and friends have just accepted that, like, you just get 2 pictures on my Insta page, just get food, and there is often like flowers, but that's it. Like, yeah, food, without a doubt, it's like such a huge part of my life, in such a, yeah,
That's
without
beautiful.
a doubt. Yeah.
Natasha, what about you?
I've got 2.
Okay.
So my first one is a therapist, and my second one is a vet, and then merging them together, it's Dr. Dolittle, right?
Amazing.
So I think I'd like to be a therapist to animals in a way, but I think both of them are like life, in all seriousness, like being a vet and being a therapist are both like lifelong kind of journeys of learning. And I guess that's also what being a writer is, I guess, with any profession, but yeah.
Cool. Matilda, what about you?
I was just reminded, because of the way Natasha described it, I was reminded that I used to say, especially when I was younger, I used to say I wanted to be a baker in space. So kind of like half baker, half astronaut. But as an adult, my more kind of attainable option would be a pilot. There's something about being in the sky or above ground or high up that I just absolutely love. I love being able to look down at the world and it looks so small, and like all your worries and stresses about living on this planet just look they don't feel as big as they do when you're like on the ground.
Matilda, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
If there's no gravity in space, how do you bake with the flour and with the eggs and stuff?
That is a very good question. I imagine I've got a base on the moon and I've opened up this kind of bakery that has artificial gravity to allow me to bake.
Great answer. You thought that one through. Leo, you're next, please.
I always wanted to be a nurse. That was it. I thought I'm going to be a nurse, or I'm going to like I didn't actually think about being a writer till like really super like recently. So it's like a nurse, or I'm going to like make stuff up, which is I ended up doing this one.
Nessah, what about you?
There's quite a few things. I think I'd quite like to be a psychologist, because I think that's quite interesting. But then I'm pretty useless. Like, I can't cook to say, not that you need to cook to be able to be a psychologist. I've got this dream to be, I'd like to run a B&B, like in Dorset or something, and have a just like have like maybe 5 bedrooms that are rented out. I've thought about this a lot, but I'd have to get my husband to do the cooking because I can't cook, and I'd probably I'd have to do the cleaning. But yeah, maybe. What was the other thing I was thinking? There's I can't remember now. It's gone. Yeah, lots of things.
Nice. Frazer, what about you?
I would be part carpenter, part florist.
Amazing.
So I think I'd have half of a workshop where I'd make the furniture, and then I'd move it to the other part of the workshop and put flowers on it.
Beautiful.
And maybe serve a bit of coffee.
Yeah.
I'm terrible at making coffee though, but I'd get someone else for that. Yeah.
I really like making things in my hands. I had to paint the walls in my flat recently, and I like to be able to see really tangibly what you've done at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Because I don't know about you, about writing. Sometimes I can get to the end of the day and I'm like, have I even written anything today? Like, because you've been daydreaming or you've been planning, and it's nice to have something tangible, like to go, oh, I painted that wall.
So if they said, is it a table? I'd be like, it's got 4 legs, it stands up, it's a table.
Yeah.
50 quid, bye.
Yeah, it's very simple.
Yeah, that's me. That's what I do.
Cool, that's all our questions.
What would you be, Charlie?
What would I be? I almost joined the army, you know, when I was young. So if I wasn't creative, I think I'd really enjoy that. I think something really like practical and tangible and physical. So yeah, painting, decorating, army person. Cool. Thanks everyone. Bye.